So this afternoon, the title of the Dharma talk is a question, and the question is, what doesn't depend? What doesn't depend on something else? Is there anything that doesn't depend on something else? Okay, go ahead. I'll respond to the question. I don't know if I'll be able to answer it or not, but so it's just another way of endeavoring to point out the fundamental nature of this reality that seems so ongoing and solid and fluctuating and up and down, right and wrong, back and forth. The 8 worldly dharmas of success, failure, good and bad, you know them. And we're so caught by that based on the 3 poisons and hope and fear. We're just trapped by that. We're drawn, even the as it says in the sutras, the slightest deviation will fail to accord with a proper attunement, which is just a relative way of saying there isn't anything but this. If you think that there's something else than this, then you're caught up in dependent origination, which is the truth that the Buddha taught. Everything is pratitya samutpada, dependently arisen. But is there something that doesn't depend? So this body, this psychosomatic construct that we keep taking to be someone, and so on. We keep eating. We just had food. And you could think about that a little further. Take that whole idea of food and go right down into that. It's like food, eating food. So this is actually food. It's food for an alligator for sure. But it's also a food for worms. It's just energy that gets not so much trapped, but delayed on its passage from one form to the next. It just happens to show up as a human being. This universe is vast and beyond discovery. You can't discover something you already are, but you can, to use the relative word, you can realize it, you can awaken to it. It can be done. You can do it. So what doesn't depend? Is there something that doesn't depend? Probably not. But even that statement of negativity has underlying, resonates with some underlying understanding that we already have. This is called your Buddha nature, your who you are before your parents' birth, before anything showed up, what this was. Before anything appeared, what this was. And even the what is extra. Like WHAT, what's happening at the temple. Isn't that? Oh yeah. That's what Gyokido sends me in the morning. What? And then she tells me a bunch of stuff. So some teachers talk about the seeking mind and seeing that, and the sage Papaji of the last century said quite often in his talks would say, give up the search. Not easy to do that. Give up looking for something else. Something else. This is the second noble truth of the Buddha. We want things to be different than they are. However they are, we want something else. And rather than looking at what they are, we tend to switch over to some other aspect of phenomena, the manifestation of phenomena, in terms of things or thoughts or ideas or concepts or beliefs or opinions. So, just a minute. So finding that, it's been said, and I'm not making this up, it's just repeating something, it's been said that actually finding this is no finding. That's why it's called a finding. Read the Diamond Sutra 100 times. Read it 500 times. Memorize it. Or memorize the Sermon on the Mount. I don't do that. So it is, we have to find some way to use our relative imprisonment to understand what those bars are, what that cage is about. We have to understand that cage. You can't just bust out of it using more locks and keys. You can't leave something, and you have to understand that you have never been in prison. Who you actually are, that which is not dependently arisen, can't be in prison because there isn't anything separate from it. There isn't anything separate from you. There isn't anything separate from me. There isn't anything separate. Consciousness, awareness, fundamental nature. The fundamental nature belongs to no one. If it belongs, then there's that polarity that immediately shows up, and then we have all the rest of the world showing up. Everything else comes into being as passion, aggression, ignorance, hope, and fear, love and hate, war and peace. Go ahead.
What is it or is there anything that sees delusion?
So a relative way of talking about it is delusion sees delusion. There aren't two things. So if you name something, then there isn't anything else. The awareness of that is not a separate from what it's aware of. It takes a while. It takes a while because we keep looking for what? Evidence. We keep looking for results. We keep looking for progress. This is progress. More?
Does delusion never stand still?
Pardon me?
Does delusion never stand still?
Find out if it's moving. We impute movement, we impute stillness. So you're picking one, I'm picking the other. Pick, 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 pick. More? Showed up.
You brought up the teaching of give up the search. Can we give up the search and continue to practice?
You could. I don't really use that. I just am quoting Papaji, and that's the way he talked to his intimate students. One of the ways. The way I would say is just see that you're searching. You don't have to do anything other than it's always from this point of view over here, which is hardly a point of view. But insofar as it is a point of view, I say just awareness. Just awareness. It's just situational. As long as there's a manifestation, it's situational. Until you see that that's actually untrue. And of course, that's the truth. That was easy, wasn't it? More questions?
How can we include our want for something else without abandoning it?
Paraphrase.
Does the search for something else arise spontaneously?
So it might be better to say it arises impulsively, because we don't particularly care for what is immediately there, because it is a combination of causes and conditions that we have not looked at all of the laminations, all the depth of that, the tributary streams flowing in the darkness. You can't see them, so we just pick one out and we blame it, or we give it credit, or we try to join it. More? I didn't answer your question, so that's why I thought you might have something else. Okay. Jason.
Having been asking you questions for a long time, they start to seem like the answer isn't necessarily something that's tangible, or maybe not even necessarily an answer. So I'm wondering about when we're asking questions, how can we, or what is the motivation if not trying to find something to grasp onto?
Serve all beings, help others. Takes a while. As long as you think there's somebody else, then there's going to be this person. So the questions could be to benefit all beings. If you receive the vow, the Bodhisattva vow, to be with all things, save all beings, then you should function as all beings. When I say you should, maybe you shouldn't. More?
Is the function of asking questions about receiving a right answer?
I'm not sure
I think it was a week or two ago we were talking about like dead-end questions.
yeah.
It seems that anytime we ask a question, we're just looking for more relative reference points.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if there's something more to that interaction than just, I have a question and here's an answer.
Mm-hmm. There could be. Or maybe not.
How does something that can arise and fall away stand still?
So relative statements about things tend to magnetize the hidden areas that want things to be different. Sometimes we think, well, we don't really want something else. This is okay. That's another kind of ignoring. It's actually taking any position at all. If you take any position at all, you just this is the fundamental nature of ignorance, is to take a position. Just like if I look at this, I'm ignoring you. A simple metaphor. Go ahead.
If we see how we take a position on something, is that actually taking a position on something?
No, that's the path. That's just a footstep. It's like we title the noon book study Footsteps, because it's just footstep and another footstep and another footstep. And it's relative truth until it's not. At some point there aren't even any feet. Go ahead.
Does positionality require some kind of communication, even if it's mental?
Say more.
I'm wondering if there are positions that I've taken that I'm not even aware of.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes I see a position arise within my mind and I observe it. So I'm wondering if there's a position that I've taken that I haven't seen.
Probably. More than likely. But it's, as I've said hundreds of times, it's never about correcting or fixing or getting better. The Dzogchen teachers talk about this as being the great perfection. What are they talking about? They're saying there isn't anything to fix. It's already the case. Just stop covering it up. You could even say that the covering up is the great perfection. So it's about being aware of the cover-up, being aware of the position, without buying it, without rejecting it, or without turning away from it. Those are the three ways that we avoid the truth. And even the truth is questionable if you get that high on the rainbow. I like that face. That's a good one. That's a good face. Less beard. Look very cute. Yes.
If the cover-ups, the great perfection as well, what purpose does realizing that serve?
So, to end suffering, we don't actually, suffering doesn't even, as long as there's nerve endings, a bunch of them, and through all the sense fields, you're not going to end pain. But you can end the the suffering that comes out of constantly wanting something else. More?
How can we see that without wanting to end our suffering?
So the without part of your question is what needs to be seen. So you can't, I can't say do this, do that. I'm already telling you to do, I'm already interfering with your samsaric life quite a bit by actually accepting you as a student.
I'm sorry.
You came to me, and I said, are you sure? Then you came again, you said, and I said, you really sure about this? And you came again, and I think it was 3 or 4 times? 5 times? 4?
First time.
Which times? I don't know. I think the jukai was several times, and then the robe was several more times. And then finally I said, okay, go ahead. And you said, go ahead.
Is the ending of suffering not something else?
That's not something else. There's no end to suffering. There's no beginning. There's no suffering. It's a powerful, powerful understanding that only you can have. Everyone in here can have this. It's an astonishing mystery of the whole thing, that you can be separate and not separate at the same time. And of course, time and space are also not separate. So it gets very, very difficult to be somebody else. You're going to have to be yourself. That's not easy. I mean, who wants to be me? Does that mean I have to accept myself? No, you don't. Just don't fight with anything. Lose the war. Lose all of them. More?
Seems like in a relative sense that it's easy to latch onto what we think wanting something else is, and it's easy to default on thinking that means to accept something. So what is being yourself?
Well, relatively speaking, it's being nobody. The Vidyadhara Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche used the metaphor of a grain of sand. Or the other one I really like that some of you will remember is you're in a pot, you're a carrot, and you're in a pot of vegetables, it's boiling, and the cook, which is, who knows who that is, probably you, is there with a potato masher, and you bob up, and I think he said something like, get back down in there, you're too yellow or too orange. Isn't that great? Nobody, you're nobody. You're not even your worst nightmares, nobody. It's just nightmare. Nobody has the nightmare. Nobody has the suffering that you're having, the pain you're having, no one's having it. It's just pain. Nothing extra. No praise, no blame, no picking, no choosing. No criticism, no criticism, no compliment, no nothing. It's all extra. It's all about substantiating, reifying, and validating some kind of a self who can do things right, or some kind of self who can do things wrong. It's a misunderstanding. And the Mahayana path is not about attaining enlightenment. It is about saving all beings. That's what makes it different from the Shravakayana, Pratyekabuddhayana. Yes, sir.
What is the distinction between a bodhisattva and a Buddha?
There's no distinction.
Can they be used synonymously?
Depends on who's using it. I recommend that they're kept separate until you see what they are. Especially as a teaching device. If you're talking to someone about it, then they could be separated. And it's funny because even on you get up to the higher bhumis, there's disagreement about which bhumi is actually the Buddha. And you see, is it the 10th? And no, I think you got to go to the 11th to be an actual Buddha. It's just, what do they call it? Splitting fur? Is that what it's called? Parting hair. No. Come on, help me.
Splitting hairs.
Breeding carriages?
Hares.
Hares?
Hares.
Hares, oh, okay.
Rabbits, hares.
So that means hares, no, rabbits. That's bloody rabbits. I like that. Don't hurt them. Wait till they're dead. Then. That's not that funny, Dallas.
I'm sorry.
Don't laugh at death. That would be a good title for a book of poems.
Don't
Yeah.
laugh at that.
Yeah,
Put it on the list.
good. And you can write it. Further questions? Yes.
Sokuzan from Traverse City has a question.
Yes.
She asks, how can one stop covering up if the covering is dependently arisen?
You don't, that's the key right there. You've just asked it in the question. It's not about stopping anything. You're saying, how does one stop if it's about, of course, it's dependently arisen, so get your ass out of there. Don't manifest as a manipulator of cause and effect. Trying to get to the good stuff, keep away the bad stuff. Knock it off. And when I say knock it off, sit down, hold still, don't do anything. Except just receive. Be a good host. Whatever shows up, welcome. Whatever shows up, welcome. Whatever goes away, not even so much as an adios. It just goes away, and it comes back, goes away. Yes?
What is the host within the host?
That's the one we were talking about.
What's the other one?
It's right next to it. Jeez. Oh, I know what you're saying. It's turtles all the way down. That one. There's no difference between monkey meditation and frog meditation, even though one is wiggling and one is holding still. Same.
And it's not as obvious if I'm not jumping up and moving around and then coming back and sitting still. What is the monkey meditation and the frog meditation in my own mind?
Extra. They're additions. We use the concept, the conceptual situation, because it's so seductive, because it depends on relative plus and minus, up and down, black and white, all of that. It depends on it, and the concepts themselves align themselves with all the variations in phenomena that we tend to trust that there must be some truth at the end of the tunnel or whatever. So it's about seeing it deeply. And if you look this way or if you look that way, if you adjust that all away from what's directly arising in your own mind, in the world, if you move at all, as it says in the sutra, hair's breadth of deviation. Don't budge, don't move. And if you do move, just observe the movement. Don't criticize the movement or congratulate the movement. Do nothing with it. Less is better. Sit down, hold still, just observe. That's the training part to sharpen the blade, so a two-edged blade of prajna cuts through this and then cuts through that. Just a metaphor for transcendent wisdom or seeing stuff.
Are we socialized into covering up our wisdom?
Yes, the culture. It's just it's material materialism. It's scientific materialism. It's spiritual materialism, cultural materialism. Materialism. You have to have some. You have to get something. It's a merchandising situation all over the place. So the culture is all about that, about being, and it's not that people aren't being hurt by some activity and helped by others and harmed. I'm not saying that there isn't something going on there. As long as there's nerve endings, and as long as there's people imputing that their nerve endings belong to them, then there's going to be difficulty. It's when one person realizes that they aren't seeing anything but themselves everywhere. then then the idea of one attaining enlightenment for yourself is just ridiculous. You have to attain enlightenment for others. And how do you do that? Just receive what's coming. As Dogen said in the 13th century, if you keep going out towards things you want, chasing things down and tracking things down and thinking this, thinking that, this is a delusion. But when you allow all the dharmas to come to you, this is awakening. Because then there's no longer, even though we're in a relative world, the fundamental nature is seen to be ultimate truth. Go ahead.
So we have this new baby in our community now.
We do?
Well, is he here? Oh, he had to go out.
Yeah. Yes.
When he is here.
When he is here, yes.
So is there a way as a Sangha that we can not enculturate him like we have been?
Yeah, you could not meddle with him. Difficult to do that because we have so many ideas and forums and we're so drenched in our own culture. Not too bad of a place to be born. In a Buddhist monastery.
So are each of us born with a particular backpack of karma?
Sure. And karma is neither true nor false. You can't point to anything that is just that, unless it is just that. But if there's just that and just that, then just this is not just that.
So is it possible for
Did you
us?
follow me? You were thinking while I was talking.
I was.
What were you thinking about?
Is it possible to see others' karma?
When you see that it's not separate from yours. More?
So when you see that it's not separate from yours, what's to be done?
Nothing. Don't do anything. Something needs to be done, you won't be able to help it. But that will only arise if you're willing to just be. You're just here. Then any motion that comes out of this particular, as I said before, psychosomatic construction or machinery will happen out of causes and conditions. It won't be interfering with anything. The inspiration will be teachings of the Buddha. Everything is dependently arisen. There isn't anything but the Buddha. Everything is awake. Just under the covers of your karma, your idea, your concepts, your hope and fear. More? Andrew?
You said awareness of that is not separate from what it's aware of. Can you say more about that?
So initially, the path quality is we're aware of that, or we're aware of this, or we're aware of our jealousy, and we're watching that go, or we're aware that that's kind of backing off, or we're aware of all the relativities that are happening without interfering with them, without trying to correct. We're just a willingness to just be with whatever. If you're walking down the path and rocks appear, you don't argue with the rocks. If the weather changes, you don't argue with the weather. You don't blame, you don't credit, no comment. And just footstep after footstep after footstep. It looks relative until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, then phenomena and space are no longer two separate things. The very space in which the thoughts appear and the thoughts themselves are not separate. Nothing is separate. The whole idea of separation itself is seen to be illusion. There isn't anything but this, and even that is a relative statement. But it's meant to encourage people to train their minds to see fundamentally what is true. So when death comes without warning, you won't mind. I'm not saying you want to leave, that's the other way, but you won't mind. You just understand that who you are is unborn and unceasing. We actually can't be destroyed. The only things that come into existence can be taken out of existence. So it's just a mistaken identity, simply put. More? Dallas?
Things of which that are alive and do not have nerve endings with the capacity to remember.
Again, please?
I said things that are alive but don't have nerve endings with the capacity to remember. Are they still capable of suffering?
You mean like rocks?
Things that are alive, so maybe
Like a plant?
plants or
Yeah,
like
that-
singular cells or something like that.
Yes, that can suffer. That plant is suffering now. We chopped it off and stuck it in another thing that's alive on a different level. It's all a matter of levels. There isn't anything but consciousness. And it's showing up in, try to count them. More?
Is the decision to
Wait, what was that? The flower made a decision? Oh, okay.
Is the decision to have made that into an arrangement and cut short the life of flower unskillful karma?
You can't help but kill. That's why the precepts are set up. There's only one life which is unkillable, not to interrupt the mandala, the present moment. There's no taking life precept. But that doesn't mean you're in charge of everything. That means that once you see someone else doing something, that doesn't mean you get to go in and say, you're breaking your precepts. You shouldn't be doing that. I have a word for that, but it's Sanskrit, so I'm not going to say it. So this is it's just relatively, it's a relative situation that we're in. So we use flowers. We use flowers. We eat food. And something can eat us. We're food. Everything here is made of food, what we ate. We kind of ignore that without food, this nerve endings wouldn't be here. So things are going to live and die and live and die. If you're alive, that means you kill things, or you have to eat dead things. Or maybe you eat them alive. Are there things you can eat that are alive? What are those things that people eat that are alive?
Oysters?
Yeah. How do you think they feel? Well, I'm glad they're not killing me. I can see right through your ears. Do those have little magnifying glasses in them?
Yeah, actually, kind of. They are glass, so they do bend light.
Huh. Well. Yes.
Question from Mayun.
Mayun
Over
and
Brittany. She's up late.
she is up late. From France, it's like midnight.
Mm-hmm. She asks, when you say you have to attain enlightenment for others, there is an impulse, a subtle sense of seeking. Do the bodhisattva vows only make sense ultimately?
No, the bodhisattva vows are relative teaching. Bodhisattva, that's why they have levels. I don't usually refer to the levels because it just adds more concepts. Not that there's not something to it. But the first level, the first bhumi is mudita, or joy. And that's the joy that arises when one sees there isn't anyone. There's still somebody else out there. The elseness is still going on. But there's no self in the skandhas. Form, feeling, perception, concept, and consciousness no longer, they're not gone, but they don't hook up. Keon?
When we ask a question and there's an answer, do the answers depend?
Yeah. Unless it's something I say, of course. Yes, there's always a dependent, we're gonna get rid of dependent origination, if it's, as long as there's some kind of a manifestation in this sense, so.
So do the answers answer?
Pardon me?
Do the answers answer?
Just take an aspirin.
It's probably
It's a good question, actually. It's just, how'd you like the answer?
I took it as.
Okay. Further questions? Have any? So,
Is dependent origination dependent on something else?
well, the concept of dependent origination is, I mean, you're right in the place where all that cooking is done, so yeah, there's something happening there. Seeing that things are dependently arisen is dependent for a while on the witnessing of the polarity of things, and the witnessing that things are moving, coming and going and coming and going. The more you see the contrast and less the attribution of praise and blame, or the attribution of good and bad, that stops you, and that creates a self who doesn't like bad and likes good, and creates the whole miasma, or whatever you want to call this, or matrix of apparent existence. But it's just a teaching device. It's not ultimately true. It's not even relatively true if you look closely. There isn't anything that's relatively true. Well, that wasn't so clear. Should be a question about that. Yes? Don't say, what do you mean by that?
Does distinction arise from the belief in content?
I think it does. Yeah, I think it does. We believe, if something happens, that we believe it's that way. When really there's probably a lot of other variables that are happening behind that. It's happening all the time, but all kinds of situations. But just our situation, our whole water heater situation, the tendency to assume things are happening behind the scenes. Somebody's not doing their job, or somebody is doing their job, or all of the different things that can arise there. It's much easier to just make an assumption about something, rather than let that be completely open. Remember how that was showing up? Yes, go ahead.
What's the pain that arises from too much openness?
It's a threat that there's some kind of, that who you think you are, your imputation of a self, is somehow threatened. And that's just it's like the natural bodhicitta that is radiating out everywhere, and you're taking that personally. You think that you're going to be harmed, but it's actually bodhicitta that's kind of the self-centeredness that is another aspect of consciousness that is highly sophisticated, just extremely introverted or ingrown, and trying to get the power around it to work on its behalf. It's called greed. More?
Can we lessen our fear to that openness?
Yes, face the wall, hold still, watch what moves. Don't add, don't subtract, don't divide. Do no more math at all unless you're making food. Then you should use a measuring device. Especially you.
We'll put the lid on.
And put the lid on, yeah. Don't leave the lid off the rice. It's not workable. That's actually wrong. Further questions?
What if you're making red or rice pudding?
Do I get some? Okay, then, what was your question? Put the lid on. What do they say? Put a lid on it. My stepfather used to say that. Further questions? We have a couple minutes, if we can, yes.
The questions I asked earlier, my friend Stephanie asked me a question. She says, I was trying to give her an answer, I don't have an answer. And so, I was wondering.
Is she a meditator?
She's interested in it. We talk about it a lot.
Talking about meditation is
It's
quite a
not-
bit different.
Yeah, it's not meditation.
Go ahead.
She asked me whether to essentially stem cell research, or whether or not it's ethical or not in the views of Buddhism. So I was wondering what you might have a take on that.
I'm not following your question.
Like stem cell research, whether it's ethical or unethical, or
Oh,
whether
unethical?
Yeah, or ethical. Because I mean, you could go and help someone, walk again, but you're killing a single cell in order to do that.
I think it's so, I think we need to really, from this area here, needs to be about the awareness of it. And if the awareness is primary, then the relative situation will be more clear, because you're going to hurt somebody. You can't live in this kind of a world without there being some suffering, so we can't get rid of it. So as far as ethical, unethical, the whole idea of ethics, it's meant to help and it's meant to serve, but quite often it's misunderstood as rules you should follow. No. In this lineage anyway, the forms, the 16 precepts are to be observed. So this way, anytime anything happens that brings up the understanding of a precept, we should look deeply into that to see what is happening there. It's I don't know if it was Bonhoeffer, but some philosopher coined the term situation ethics, and it's about the situation will tell you what the proper ethics are for that. It will tell you if you're aware of what's happening. You might, at one time, someone might need an abortion, and sometime they probably should have the child, but it should be, in that situation, it should be about the person who's the potential mother, not people in distant places. And with stem cell research, I know that's another very situational thing. It gets so complicated in that area that I don't think there's you should do this, you shouldn't do that. I think we should be as aware. If I had something to say about it, I would say if you're spending 8 hours a day doing stem cell research, you could start out with a couple of hours of just awareness practice, so that when you go in and work with that, the clarity around what you're doing is much more evident. Not to attain enlightenment particularly, but just be more clear about what you're doing. Sometimes that's painful. Sometimes the awareness, instead of creating, as they sometimes talk about in mindfulness training, I'm more peaceful, I'm more relaxed. Now that I practice mindfulness, everything is settled down, I'm less anxious. And from my understanding, having done this for a while, when you do awareness practice, might not be such a good sign that you suddenly feel really good, really peaceful. You might be covering up with a whole lot of mindfulness rhetoric, what you need to be looking at, which might be stem cell research that you're doing in the afternoons. It might be what you're actually doing when you disagree with somebody or agree with somebody. What's actually happening there deeply, rather than just a surface commentary. So awareness, not right and wrong. Right and wrong are just a very low level of thinking. Societies that don't have too much sophistication going on there. Even this society is not particularly sophisticated.
What is awareness?
Huh?
What is awareness?
So have to make it into something, give it some kind of substance. It's It's like the space in which things occur. It's the space around the phenomena until it's seen to be not separate from the phenomena. So it starts out as the sky and the clouds arising in the sky, and that's the way I talk about it when I'm talking about shikantaza. So you start somewhere, and then at some point, your question earlier, at some point there is no separation between anything. Space, objects, me, you, this, that, the wall, the lights, spiders, bats, pink mice, little pink mice. There's no separation. So you actually can see that. And when I say see through all the sensials, not just seeing, but feeling, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching. Everything understands deeply. At the same time, it's a deep understanding. It's just a tacit understanding. It's just like you've just touched something. You've just touched a red-hot iron. And it's not an event. Awakening is not an event. It might be eventful. Some people have times, there's in the Zen tradition that was recognized early on, and they called it Kensho. Not Satori or Samadhi, ultimate Samadhi, or the Vajra-like Samadhi. The Vajra-like Samadhi is the adamantine or indestructible Samadhi, which means there isn't anything else to see. And it's not an experience. Experiences come, and then they go. Enlightenment, if it comes, it's going to go. Anyone who has awakened, which, as far as I know, I've only met 2 people face to face. I'm sure there are lots of others, but Kobunchi Roshi and Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, and I suspect the 17th Karmapa, also the 16th Karmapa, possibly Dalai Lama. I don't know. I'm not here to judge. But anyone who sees this and no longer is separated, and if you meet them, they don't function as separated unless you're separated in front of them. And when you separate, they point to it. And they do it immediately. They don't think about it. And then when you listen, then their body is still there, but then they vanish from the point of view of any kind of teaching. No maintenance of a teacher. If there's a maintenance of a teacher, then this is a lower level of teaching called PhD programs. Which are necessary, of course. Further questions? Further yawns? I bet I yawn more than you do. But I don't do it in public. Aren't you glad I didn't say that about you? No? Yeah. You can't tell where I'm looking?
I think so.
No. I was going to tell another joke or something, but it's not going to work because you will play along. I might as well give up. Thank you so much.